Serafina had never been the kind of woman who demanded attention. She did not walk into rooms looking for applause. She did not raise her voice when she disagreed, and she did not wear her pain where people could see it. She simply did what needed to be done, cared for the people around her, and trusted that doing good quietly was enough. For 3 years, that quiet goodness had built a life inside the Ashevail Palace. She had organized relief supplies after the eastern floods. She had sat beside the sick in the lower town when no one else would. She had learned the names of every guard, every cook, every stable worker, not because it was required of her, but because they were people, and people deserved to be seen. King Calum noticed her first for her eyes. He kept her close because she was steady in a world that never stopped moving. And for a long time, she believed that was enough. She believed they were building something real. She was wrong. She smashed. The morning it ended, the sky outside was gray and soft, like the world had not yet decided what kind of day it would be. Serafina was in the eastern garden, cutting stems for the hall vases, a small task she had taken on personally because the head gardener was unwell, when a palace servant came to find her. She was needed in the throne room, immediately. She set down her shears, washed her hands in the fountain nearby, and walked inside. The throne room was not empty. Several senior advisors stood along the walls. Calum sat at the head of the long table in the center, not on the throne itself, which somehow made it worse. He looked like a man conducting business. He looked calm. Standing beside him was a woman named Marin, from the Northern Holloway family, tall, beautifully dressed, with the kind of composed expression that comes from growing up knowing you will always land on your feet. Calum did not stand when Serafina entered. He folded his hands on the table and spoke in the same tone he used to address quarterly reports. He said that the political situation had changed, that a formal alliance with the Holloway family was now essential, that the arrangement required a commitment he could no longer offer Serafina, that she had served the palace with grace, and he was grateful, that she would be given safe passage and a settlement, and he hoped she would understand. He never once looked ashamed. Serafina stood very still for a long moment. She looked at him, not with anger, not with tears, just with the kind of clear, quiet attention that sees a person all the way through. And what she saw was a man who had always chosen what was easiest to measure: power, land, numbers, things that fit neatly into columns. She had never fit into a column. She nodded once. She thanked him for his honesty. She turned and walked out. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of her bed for exactly as long as it took to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Then she stood, pulled a travel bag from under the bed, and began to pack. She took only what she had come with: a few changes of clothing, a small book of pressed flowers she had collected from every region she had ever visited, and a photograph of her mother, who had passed years ago and would have had a great deal to say about all of this. She did not take any of the jewelry. She did not take the ceremonial items, the gifted silks, the things that marked her as belonging to the palace. None of it had ever truly been hers. Before dawn, when the halls were quiet and the gate guards were changing shifts, Serafina walked out through the main entrance. Not the servant's side door. Not the back passage that staff used when they wanted to go unnoticed. The front gate, the one that faced the wide stone road leading into the kingdom's heart. She walked through it with her bag over one shoulder and her back straight, and she did not look behind her once. The world outside the palace was not kind at first. She crossed through the Greymoor forest, where the trees grew so close together that full daylight felt like early evening. She slept in the hollows of old roots the first 2 nights, with no fire and nothing but her coat, and her own stubbornness keeping her warm. She ate what the forest offered: berries she recognized from her mother's teachings, mushrooms she tested carefully, water from streams that moved fast enough to be clean. She was not a trained survivor, but she was patient. And patience, she had learned long ago, was its own kind of strength. After the forest came the salted flats, a wide, pale stretch of cracked earth, where nothing grew, and the wind came from every direction at once. Most people avoided it. Caravans went far around it. But crossing it directly shaved 2 weeks off the journey north, and Serafina had always been practical about such things. She crossed it in 4 days, rationing her water carefully, walking mostly at night when the temperature dropped and the flat white ground seemed to glow faintly under the stars. On the other side of the flats, At the foot of the Ash-Crown Mountains was a small stone house that looked as though it had grown directly out of the hillside. Smoke rose from its chimney. A lantern burned in the window. Serafina had not told anyone she was coming. She did not know anyone lived here. She knocked only because she was tired, and the door was there. The woman who opened it was old in the way that mountains are old. Not decrepit, but deeply settled, full of a history that did not need to announce itself. Her name was Elder Dara, and she looked at Serafina the way you look at someone you have been expecting for a very long time. "You finally stopped walking toward him," the old woman said, stepping aside to let her in, "and started walking toward yourself." Serafina did not understand what that meant. Not right away. She stayed. The months that followed were unlike anything she had ever experienced. There were no halls to manage, no schedules to keep, no court politics to navigate. There was only the mountain, and the cold, and Elder Dara's steady, unhurried company. The old woman did not train Serafina in any dramatic sense. She simply told her the truth, about who she was, about the bloodline she carried, about why she had always felt a little out of place in spaces built on rank and inheritance. Serafina came from a line of people the old records called the Duskborn, rare, largely forgotten, connected to the land in ways that could not be inherited through titles or won through strategy. It was not a power that worked through force. It worked through presence, through genuine care, through being, in every room she entered, completely herself. The reason her strength had never been visible in the palace was simple. She had made herself small there. She had folded herself into a shape that would take up less room, cause less disruption, ask for less. And her truest self had waited, patient and quiet, for her to stop. One morning in early winter, ordinary, cold, with new snow settling on the pine branches outside, Serafina walked out behind the stone house alone. She was not trying to do anything in particular. She was simply standing in the snow, breathing, thinking about her mother, and the book of pressed flowers, and the life she was slowly, carefully rebuilding. And something shifted. It was not painful. It was more like the feeling of finally setting down something very heavy that you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten you were holding it. She changed. The wolf that stepped forward out of that change was large and silver-white, with steady eyes and a kind of quiet authority that the forest immediately responded to. The birds going still, the trees seeming to lean fractionally toward her, the snow falling a little more gently. She stood in that form for a long time, then she sat down in the snow, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something she could only describe as home. In the years that followed, Serafina did not live in isolation. Other people found their way to the mountain, people who had been turned away from pack systems, people with no recognized bloodline, people who had been told they were not enough. She welcomed them the same way Elder Dara had welcomed her, practically, honestly, without ceremony. She built a sanctuary, not a palace, not a fortress, a real place, where people grew food and learned skills, and looked after one another. She organized it carefully, learned what her people needed, solved problems with the same quiet efficiency she had once used to manage palace supply chains. The work suited her. She was good at it in a way she had never been allowed to be good at anything before. She did not think much about the Ashevail kingdom. When she did, it was without bitterness. That chapter had happened. It had formed her in ways she was still understanding, but it was finished. What pulled her back was not unfinished business with Calum. It was her people. Reports began arriving from the border regions, travelers passing through the sanctuary, rogue families drifting in from the east, all carrying the same story. Villages had gone silent, crops were failing, pack bonds that had held for generations were weakening without explanation, and the problem was spreading outward, reaching the communities Serafina had taken responsibility for. She could not ignore that. She gathered the people who wanted to come, dozens of them, each one capable and willing, and they rode south together toward the Ashevail lands. Not with anger, not with any plan to take anything, simply to fix the problem that was hurting people. The kingdom was not the same place she had left. 3 years of tension had worn it down in ways that were visible even from the road. The border towns looked tired. The people in the markets moved with a kind of low, persistent worry that was hard to describe but easy to recognize. The gate guards saw her coming from a distance. They did not stop her. Perhaps they did not know whether they were supposed to. Perhaps they simply looked at the calm, silver-haired woman at the head of a quiet column of travelers and made a decision based on what they felt, rather than what they had been told. The throne room was full when she arrived. Everyone in the court seemed to already know she was coming. Calum stood near the table, not sitting, for once. Marin stood beside him, perfectly still, watching with careful eyes. The advisors, the attendants, the guards, they were all there, lining the walls, filling the space. Serafina walked to the center of the room and stopped. She did not perform. She did not make a speech designed to impress anyone. She spoke clearly, in simple terms, and said exactly what was true. She explained what was happening to the land. She explained the connection between the Duskborn bloodline and the foundation of the kingdom's oldest systems. Systems so old, most people had forgotten they existed at all, but that the land itself still ran on. She said the problem was fixable, but that it would require her presence in the border regions, unobstructed, to work properly. She asked for recognition of her sanctuary as protected independent ground. That was all. The room was very quiet when she finished. Marin spoke first, using careful legal language about standing and rights, and the validity of dissolved arrangements. Several advisors nodded along. It was a good argument, technically constructed, but the court had watched Serafina walk in. They had heard what she said, and they had seen, over the past 3 years, what her absence had cost. Commander Ryland spoke next. He had found the old records himself, had spent months piecing together what had happened and why, and had spent even longer carrying the guilt of having said nothing on the day Serafina walked out. He pledged his personal protection to the sanctuary. He did it publicly, in front of everyone, looking directly at his brother when he said it. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Calum stood at the edge of it for a long time. Something moved across his face that was not easy to watch. The expression of a person understanding, all at once, the full weight of a decision they made quickly and lived with slowly. He did not try to explain it. He did not make promises about who he was becoming. He simply asked for the formal document to be brought, and he signed it. It recognized the sanctuary. It acknowledged the wrongful dissolution. It named Serafina an independent alpha, not a Luna, not a consort, not a position that existed in relation to anyone else, just herself. She received the document without expression. She thanked him, and she meant it. There was nothing cold in the thanks, and nothing warm in it either. It was the gratitude you offer when something that should have been right is finally made right, years too late to matter in the way it once would have. She went home. The healing of the land took several months. Serafina moved through the border regions quietly, spending time in each failing village, working alongside the people there, doing ordinary things. Planting, building, sitting at fires and listening. The change was gradual, then sudden. The way seasons turn, not all at once but in accumulation, until one morning you step outside and something is different, and you know it has been coming for a long time. The harvests came in. The village bonds strengthened. The silence that had settled over the eastern lands slowly, carefully lifted. On the day the last report arrived confirming that the border regions were stable, something happened that no one had planned. Every alpha in the Ashevail territory traveled to the edge of the sanctuary and performed the oldest acknowledgement ritual in the kingdom's tradition, one so old it had not been used in living memory. It was reserved for those who held the true root of the land. They knelt. Serafina stood in the open field outside the sanctuary in the cold afternoon light. Dozens of people knelt in the snow before her. Powerful men and women, leaders of old families, commanders with long histories. And for a moment, she simply let it be what it was. A recognition, a correction. Then she shifted, and her silver-white wolf stood there for one long breath in the winter air, steady and still. The forest behind her was perfectly quiet. Then she shifted back. She pulled her coat around her. She turned and walked back through the gate of the sanctuary, where the evening meal was already being prepared, and children were calling to one another across the yard, and someone had left muddy boots directly in the middle of the path again. She stepped over the boots. She went inside. She helped set the table. The kingdom did not forget her name again.